Today we're going to be learning Yoma Daf Kafchet. Happy Mother's Day to all of you celebrating Mother's Day. We are going to start now at the top of Kafchet Amud Aleph. We ended, maybe we'll go back a little bit, and today's sheet is going to organize the different versions that we're going to have of this sugya. We started yesterday with Rabbi Asi said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Zar Shesidera Tamaracha Chayav, to which we ended up with a question of Rabbi Zera, which is, do you have an avodah shekshera balayla upsula bazar? Is there such a thing as an avodah that works at night but is disqualified for a zar? To which we now said, instead of asking that question about an avodah shekshera balayla, we should ask it in a different way. And that's where we're going to go today. I'm not going to review the whole back and forth that there was, but as you can see it on the chart, we're going to now start the sugya from the very beginning. What we saw yesterday was Rabbi Yochanan said the statement, with this Rabbi Asi said Rabbi Yochanan said it. Rabbi Zera asked a question, which was specifically focused on the fact that it's okay to do this activity at night, and therefore, why is it a problem for a zara to be doing it, a non-Kohen? To which we basically said it must be Rabbi Yochanan said something else. We changed it. Then we kind of went off on some questions about that. This time, we're going to now have a different question. The question of Rabbi Zera is from the end of yesterday's stuff. Is there something where you don't finish the avoda and you still have something to do? Remember, this is putting on the piles of the wood, one on top of the other, right, kind of intermingled like warp and woof. And we're then going to say, how could you have an avodah? If you remember, we put on after that, they do the two gzirei etzim, the two logs that the kohanim have to put on. So how could you say that if you have an avodah that isn't finished yet, because you're not finished yet, you can't start putting the fire on until you have those two extra logs, and yet a zar can't do it? To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? But we have Evarim Uptarim, which are not the end. Now, why are they not the end? Because they're followed by the Truma Hadeshin. After you burn everything, then you have to take some of the ashes and put them next to the altar. So you're not finished with the mitzvah until you do that, even though it's not exactly the same thing. And Rashi actually doesn't have this girsa, doesn't have this whole section because it is a little bit problematic, but let's assume that's connected with the next activity. We're going to go with our Gemara's version, the version that we have in front of us. So the Gemara answers, oh no, that can't answer your question, because Evarim Uptarim only Kohanim can do, even though the work isn't actually really finished, is because the work is really finished. Sof avoda diyamamihi. This is really the end of the day's avoda. Yes, you do Trumat Hadeshin after, but this is really the end. Trumat Hadeshin. What about Trumat Hadeshin itself? Where you take a little bit of the ashes and you put it next to the altar. Then you still have to take the rest of the ashes and put them on the tapuach, that apple they called it, right? The middle part in the middle of the altar. So it's also not the end of the avoda. So they say, no, well, that's tchilat avodah diyamamihi. The Trumat Hadeshin, again, we're trying to say what? That the Trumat Hadeshin is not the final activity, and therefore, if only a Kohen can do it, and yet it's not the end of the activity. So again, the answer is a little bit strange, but the answer is it's tchilat avodah diyamamihi. It's the beginning of the avoda of the day, which means it's not really connected with the putting everything in the pile. It's really, this is the first activity before you do all the activities of the day, and it's its own activity, basically. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, how do you know it's the beginning of the avodah of the yom? Because he says, Kidesh adav l'trumat hadeshin l'machari no tzarich l'kadesh shekvar kidesh mitchilat avodah. I want you to notice, these questions are the exact same questions, and if you look in the chart, I put them all together, the exact same questions that we asked in the first about Kshera B'Layla, but they mean something different here. The answers mean something different, and that's why maybe it was just copied by accident, and that's why it's a little bit hard to understand the simple reading of this, because it doesn't work so perfectly. In any case, we'll move on. Elakasha, and therefore this reading is difficult, because in the end, we shouldn't have an avoda that isn't really finished and still requires more work. That shouldn't be problematic if a zara does it, because it's not really a full avoda. It's not really finished. To which they answer, so fine, this is just like yesterday. If you want to say this is the way, you should say what Rabbi Asi said. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, zar shesider shnei gzirei etzim chayav. If he does the two gzirei etzim, He's chayav, meaning the 2 gzirei etzim and not the pile of the shti and erev, not that kind. But if he puts the 2 logs, he is obligated to the death penalty. Ho'il va'avodat tamahi. Now here comes the minor variation from yesterday. What we saw yesterday was he's chayav because it's an avodat hayom, to which they got into all sorts of questions about avodat laila and avodat yom. But here it says, no, because it's avodat tamah, because, and here's a response to Rabbi Zera's question, it's a final activity. This is the end of the activity. So matkif la Rava, Rava says, just like in yesterday, elameata tibai payis, well then it should need the payis. The low baya, so to which the Gemara says, the low baya payis, what do you mean it doesn't need a lottery? Of course it does. So now, instead of saying, oh, Rava's question, you were wrong because you forgot something. So now they explain what Rava's question is. It's a little bit different from yesterday. Now, if it's an avodat tamah, it's the final part of the activity, then it should have its own lottery. So why doesn't it have its own lottery? Yes, it's true. Whoever got the Trumat Hadeshin got to do this also. That means it does have a payis, but that's not enough. It should stand on its own. It should be a different lottery, meaning, right, one coin shouldn't do a bunch of activities. He should do this one, just this activity. So the Gemara answers Kida Amrina. There's 2 explanations given. I'll give you one of them. Rabbeinu Chanal says, as we said on Daf Kaf Bet, if you recall, the whole reason for doing the payis together was because at a certain point, Kohanim stopped for it. First, everybody wanted to do Trumat Hadeshin. Then once they instituted a lottery, nobody wanted to do it because why should you wake up so early when you have such a small chance of getting the job? So then they stopped wanting to do the payis. And then once they added to it something more important or something, there was more jobs than just one, then people already were more interested in doing it. And then they were involved for the lottery. So therefore, that's why it has a lottery, not bifnei atzma, but together with something else. So theoretically it should, but it doesn't for a different reason. Lememra, but wait, is this to say that avodat tamah v'zar chayav alei amita by a payis, right? This whole assumption is if it's final activity and a non-Kohen is going to be obligated the death penalty, then it needs a payis, but ein zar chayav alei amita. But then this would assume that what? If a zar is not chayav mita, then lo by a payis. If a zar is not going to be obligated the death penalty for something, then it sounds like you wouldn't need a payis. But exact same questions yesterday. But what about shchita? So the answer, shani shchita d'tchila avoda diyamamihi. Again, shchita is different. Why is shchita different? Shchita is one of the main avodot. It's the beginning of the avodot of the day. It's the first one, and it's a very important one. So now they're going to say, wait, lememra d'avodat tamah by a payis, avodah sheyesh acharei avodah lo by a payis. So you wait. Let's go back to now, not the zar part, but the avodat tamah. You want to say that an avodah that is the end activity, that's going to need a lottery, but something that's not avodat tamah, that's not the final activity, doesn't need it. V'harei, and now we're going to go back to the questions we asked at the beginning of today's daf, which was harei v'arim uptarim. What about those? They're not the final activity, and yet they need a payis. So now they say, oh no, that's sof avodah diyamamihi. That's the end of the day's activity. That's not considered. You haven't finished your job because you haven't done the ashes yet. No, this is its own activity in and of itself. Harei Trumat Hadeshin. What about the Trumat Hadeshin? That's also only an activity that's partial. So again, so now they have a different answer, which is actually also a good answer, which is because again, it relates to the payis. Here we have a better answer. Why do you need payis if it's not the final activity? So instead of saying it is the final activity, which is what they tried to answer above, which wasn't the most convincing answer, they answer mishuma seshaya. The whole reason you have a payis for the Trumat Hadeshin, we already know, is because of the people who were injured or killed from the fighting over it. So that's why. We're going to end with Amar Zutra v'item Ravashi af ananami tanina. We also see this. Amar lahem ha'memuneh tzeu u're'u im higia zman hashchita ilu zman sidor gezirei etzim lo katani. Right? It says go see if there's the time of the shchita, and it doesn't say the sidor gezirei etzim. So what do you see here? Right? This here now is used. Last time it was used as a question. Now it's used as a proof. Because what do you see? That it doesn't need, right? The whole point of this proof is, therefore, it must be avodat laila, which reject, in other words, this was all a rejection of saying, instead of saying the zar shishir snei gezirei etzim is obligated because it's a day activity, Now we're going to say it's not because it's a day activity, because it's not necessarily a day activity. It's because it's an avodah tamah. It's a complete avodah. It's the end of some action. So here you see, they didn't say, go see if it's light enough so that we know if it's time for shechita, if it's time to do the shnei gzirei etzim. They said only shechita, because obviously this is an activity of the night. To which the Gemara rejects it and says, no. And I want to correct my reading of it, a better reading than what I said yesterday, which is delele takanta means it can't be fixed. Okay, this can be fixed. It's not that you can do it at night. It's if you set it up at night, you can fix it. How do you fix it? You take the logs off and you put them back on and you set them up again. That's how it can be done. That's how it can be fixed. If you slaughter the animal at night, it can't be fixed. So it is an activity of the day. It's just you didn't need to check for sure if it's light enough out, because if you did make a mistake, you could just easily fix it in the morning. That's why. So I need to correct what I said yesterday and explain it this way, also in the previous sugya. So again, this last part, last time was brought as a question on, isn't it an avodah of the day? Look, it doesn't look like it is. And then they answer it. This time they tried to bring it as a proof. You see, it's an activity of the night, and the issue is really avodah tamah, that it's a complete activity, and that's why the Zar is obligated if he puts the shnei gzirei etzim, to which we said, no, that doesn't prove it. Even though you still could say it is a day activity, but you can't necessarily prove it from there. To which we say, Hadran alach b'rishona, and finish chapter 2. Okay, we're now moving on to chapter 3 of Yoma. Amar lahem hamimune, the person in charge. Rashi says it's the skan. Okay, it's the skan HaKohanim who does this. There's I just want to check one thing. I think some people, no. Right. So the skan who's in charge there, skan Kohen Gadol, he says, this is what we just saw, that they would go out onto the roof and say, is it light enough for the shechita? Right. We're on Yom Kippur morning itself. As I said, the Mishnayot are going chronologically. Imigia, if it's the right time, haro'eh omer balkai. The light has been lit. Okay, it's light. Mati ben Shmuel omer, he'ir pnei kol hamizrach ad shebechavron. So Mati ben Shmuel says, did it all light up until Chevron? V'hu omer, and he answers, hein. We have to see who is exactly talking, who's answering. We'll get to this in the Gemara. So this sounds like a ceremonial thing, right? You have to ask a question, they answer. Sounds very similar to when they did the Omer. There was all ceremony, magalzo, magalzo, magalzo. They repeat things 3 times. They do it with Kiddush HaChodesh also when they set the new moon. It falls into those categories. So what do you need this for? Exactly as I mentioned before. One time the moonlight came up. And they saw the light coming from outside and they thought that it was the sun. And they slaughtered the tamid sacrifice. It actually happened. And they had to burn it in the Beit HaSreifa. That's where you burn all sorts of sanctified meat that gets disqualified. Holidu kohen gadol lebeit hatfilah. So now they wake up in the morning. It's morning already. They bring the kohen gadol to the Beit HaTfilah. We had a whole discussion a while back about where exactly, right, where everything was and where he was starting from, where he went to, right? He was starting in the Lishkat Paradlin on the north side. He now has to go to the Beit HaTfilah, which is on the south side by the Beit of Tinas in the Shiur Hamayim, by the water gate. And not by there. It was in the one. Yeah, one sec. I have to double check that. Okay, yes, it was the Shiur Hamayim. It's the one that's above the Beit of Tinas, the mikveh there. So now they say, this was the rules of the temple. Anyone who defecates has to go into the mikveh. And anyone who urinates has to wash his hands and feet. We're going to see the Kohen Gadol does this 10 times during the day, and he does 5 tefillot. Okay, not connected obviously to when he goes to the bathroom during the whole day, but we mean in the morning he goes to the bathroom and then he has to go to the mikveh in the morning. We talked about a number of dapim ago that there was a difference between the first tefillah and all the other tefillot. This one was done outside the temple, outside the Azara, in the chol. That part was considered outside, and the other ones are done inside. Tanya Rabbi Shmuel Omer. So now we're going to start with the Braita about the whole, what was said in the morning. Barak barakai. Okay, the light is sparking or starting. Okay, it's like the initial light. Rabbi Akiva Omer Allah barakai. the light is, there the light is shining. Here it says the light has risen. Nechuma bar af kashion omer af brakai bechevron. Oh, the light has come out in Hebron, specifically in Hebron. Mati ben Shmuel omer hamimune ala payasot omer. Now we're going to see it was Mati ben Shmuel who said, not that he was the one who said it in the temple. He said that hamimune ala payasot, the one in charge of the pais, omer heir pnei kol hamizrach ad shebechevron. He says that the person in charge of the lotteries would say, the light is lit all the way, well, the whole east is lit until Hebron. Which is basically the same as the previous one, but then it says, and then they say, and everybody went out to work already. Now there's a debate about how to understand all these different opinions. Are they saying, is the difference just semantics? What was the wording used by the person? Or was the issue different times? And that maybe Barakai means it just started kind of, sparkling the light. You could see a little bit of light. Allah means it already rose. Aj b'Chevron means you can see it all the way to Hebron, or first in Hebron and then all the way to Hebron. And people have even started going to work, and that it's a progression here. Some people say it's really the same thing and it's just different wording. So now we're going to have a little bit of a problem with the last one, because if you're going to say everybody already went to work, Nagale Tuvat, then it must be really light out. And we're clearly talking about an earlier time than sunrise. So they say Liskor Poalim Ka'amrina, which means, right, it's when people go out to find workers. They want their workers to start at the sunrise, but they go out earlier to find workers. And I've seen this in Israel, where there's farm workers out on the streets very early in the morning. There's certain places where they congregate, and then people hire them for the day. In other words, they're looking for work. They go out very early, and people find them and say, okay, I need you to do this job. So it definitely is something that we see even nowadays, that people go out early to kind of get a job, and then their job starts at sunrise. So these are all different, like I said, maybe different times, or maybe just a different version about what was actually said in the temple. Amar of Safra, Slote to Avraham, when Avraham prayed, when he would pray mincha, it was as soon as the shade started coming in on the wall would start creating a shade, a shadow. So what we mean here is, we normally say that we can start mincha from 6.5 hours into the day, not immediately after the 6th hour starts, the end of the 6th hour, but more into the next hour. But when Avram davened mincha, now you might say, what do you mean? Avram only davened shachris. So he only davened the morning prayer. It was Yitzchak who did the afternoon prayer. So some people say, no. Even though it's true that he's known for instituting shacharit, and Yitzchak instituted mincha, but Avram himself obviously davened mincha. So, and we're going to talk about this in general, today's stuff about Avram and what things he did and what he didn't do. And again, the rabbi's way of kind of saying, if we do this, it must be our forefathers did this as well. And they reread, our halachic life into what the forefathers did. It's a very famous sugya here in today's daf. So you'll see a part that you might be familiar with. So Avram davened from the time, as soon as it passed the end of the 6th hour, he would already start davening mincha. So Amar of Yosef, Ana me Avram nikam v'nigmor. In other words, we should, why would we, it sounds like they're saying we should learn from Avram that he did it then. So Rav Yosef says, we're going to learn from Avram. So Amar Rava, yeah, what's wrong with learning from Avraham? In other words, Rav Yosef is saying, okay, so just because he did it doesn't mean that we should assume that we can already do. And what's the issue? When can you start the afternoon sacrifice? Can you start it as soon as the 6th hour is finished, like at midday exactly, plus a minute? Or we usually say 6.5 hours. So Rav Yosef is saying, what, you want to learn from Avram? To which Rava says, yeah, Tana Gamar my Avram, V'ana lo Gamrina mina. The Tana himself learned from Avram. So what? Who are we to say we won't learn from him? How so? Amar Rava. Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, Uba Yoma Shmini Yimo Basar Orleto. He did the Brit Milah on the 8th day. Melamed Shekol Yom Kasher LeMilah. Ela Shazrizim Makdimim in its. Sorry, this is the pasuk to us, not Avram. It says, and we should do a Brit Milah on day number 8. Okay, it's a verse from Vayikra where it says when we do it, a Brit Milah, and then circumcision teaches that you could really do a Brit Milah because it says by Yom Shmini any time of day. To which the Braita says, it's a common custom that most people do a Brit Milah in the morning. It's actually much more common in Israel that people will also do it in the afternoon. But certainly when I was growing up, everybody did Brit Milahs in the morning. Shne'amal, and still the main custom is to do it that way. Vayashkem Avraham b'boker vayachvosh. We learn it from Avram when he went to the Akedah. He got up early in the morning. So here, if the Braita learns from Avram, when he did things, that's when we should do things. So why wouldn't we learn it from him here too? So Elam Rava, Rav Yosef HaKakashele. This is what was bothering Rav Yosef. Titznan, Chal Arvei Pesachim Liot Be'erev Shabbat. If you remember, we learned this Mishnah when Erev Pesach falls on Erev Shabbat. Nishchat, like it did this year. Nishchat b'shesh v'mechza v'karev b'sheva v'mechza. This is what was bothering him. Okay. And now we get into what I said before, which is there it was slaughtered at 6.5 hours, and it was sacrificed 7.5 hours. Why didn't we say that we do it from when the walls got dark, were darkened a little bit? Now, why are we talking about this? Because when the walls in the temple darkened, that's when everyone would know that it was midday, just like before we said that they would know, although we'd have to go out on the roof because you couldn't tell exactly, right? So that's why we're talking about this. So now they say, my kushya. Okay, it's kind of the way I explained the question before. So you have to say, it must have been that the question earlier of Rav Yosef is a little different than I said. He must have been asking, let me just check. Right, I guess he was saying about mincha time. Why wouldn't we all daven mincha? Do you think we're going to learn from mincha and that we should all daven mincha exactly at 6 hours into the day? So to which they said, well, it wasn't really, that wasn't his issue. His issue really is this issue of on a day, not on a regular day, but on the day when you have so much to do, why don't we make it earlier and make it 6 hours into the day and not 6.5 hours? So then they say, my kushya, what's your question? Just like you couldn't necessarily tell if it was the light of the moon or the light of the sun coming in. Likewise, when the shadow comes on the walls might not have been perfectly straight. And you might not have been able to see it until 6.5 hours into the day. And maybe that's why they said it at 6.5 hours. Because they're not exactly lined up. Inami, alternatively, you could say, Shane Avraham, he knew a lot about the stars, much more than we do. And therefore, he was able to tell exactly when the right time is. And now you understand the reason we push it off half hour is just to make sure that you don't accidentally do it in the morning hours. Inami, mishum tizaken v'yoshev b'yeshiva. This is an interesting answer. Maybe because he was a zaken in Yoshev Yeshiva, he sat in yeshiva, he was a big Talmid Chacham. And because of that, he knew what he was doing and we don't as much. How do we know this? That he was a Talmid Chacham and sat in the Beit Midrash, okay, which is interesting, right, to say, because there weren't really Batei Midrash in those days. Obviously, we talk about the Beit Midrash of Shem Ve'ever, but again, that's a rabbinic creation to, again, view the forefathers' lives as if they lived the same life as they did, as the rabbis of the Gemara did. So now they say, all the days of our fathers, there was always a yeshiva and someone was always in them. How do we know that in Mitzrayim they had the yeshiva? Moshe told in the beginning, right, go and gather the elders of Israel. So there must have been zkenim, means they must have gone to yeshiva. Okay, they're going to assume the term zaken. Elder means an elder who learned in a yeshiva. When they were in the desert, also, because it says, when Moshe goes to gather 70 zkenim from the people, so there was zkenim. Avraham Avinu zaken v'yoshev yeshiva haya. And here's the line we needed, because he says, Avraham zaken b'abi yamin, which means he got old. But they say it must mean he was an elder, he was a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar. Yitzchak Avinu zaken v'yoshev yeshiva haya. Same thing. Shenemar vayiki zaken Yitzchak. As Yitzchak got old, again, old, elder means, right, he was learned. Yaakov Avinu zaken v'yoshev yeshiva haya. Shenemar ve'enei Yisrael kavdu mizoken. Again, his eyes got heavy with old age, but again, we understand that he was a Talmid Chacham. Not only that, forget the 3 forefathers. Eliezer, Eved Avraham, the famous Eved of Avraham. Zaken v'yoshev b'shivaya, shene'emar. Vayomar Avraham el avdoz kan beito, the elder of his house. Hamoshel b'chol asher lo. What's Hamoshel b'chol asher lo? Who rules everything of Avraham's. It's not that he was in charge of all the money, according to this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, shemoshel b'torat rabo. That he was in charge of all the Torah of his own, right, of his master. Hu damesek Eliezer, Amar Rabbi Elazar, shedole umashke mitorato shel rabo la'acherim. What does it mean, damesek Eliezer? That he would take out the Torah of his rabbi and give it to others. He would pass it on to others. Dole is to take out and pass it on to other people. Okay, Amar Rav, more on this. Kiem Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula. We know that he kept all of the Torah. How do we know this? Because it says, Shenemar Eikav asher shama Avraham b'koli. You have to read the rest of that verse, otherwise you won't get it. Okay, so because Avram listened to me, this is in Bereshit chapter 26, Vayishmor mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'toratai. He kept my mishmartai, my mishmeret, kept my observances, my mitzvot, my rules, and my torot. Okay, also another word for laws. They're all synonymous. So why does it say all these things? So we're going to learn. Amar le Rav Shimi bar Chia l'Rav ve'ema sheva mitzvot. Maybe that means just the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach. Ha'ikanami mila, but they say no. There's also Brit Milah. He kept not just the 7 Noachide laws. Ve'ema sheva mitzvot umila. Maybe he kept the 7 plus Brit Milah that he was given separately. Amar le im ke mitzvotai v'toratai lamali. Why does it use so many words to describe the same thing? It must mean he kept a lot more than that. So Amara, it's either, there's a correction here. Amar, trying to see what the correction goes to, but it's either Rav, maybe it's Rava. Yeah, should say Rava. V'itema Ravashi, or maybe Ravashi said it. Kiyem Avraham Avinu afilu eruvei tavshilin. Even eruv tavshilin that we do on Erev, when Chag falls on Erev Shabbat, and we want to be able to cook from Chag to Shabbat, he even did that. This is the famous line, because Rashi also quotes it on the pasuk there. Shenemar Torotai echat Torah shebechtav ve'echat Torah shebal peh. Right, it's a famous Rashi that's quoted on the Torah where he says there, he quotes this midrash and this Gemara, which says basically that he kept what is Torotai, both my Torot, Torah shebal peh and Torah shebechtav, and therefore he kept even eruv tavshilin. Okay, this is again an extreme way of saying that it can't be that the forefathers lived their lives any differently than we did in a halachic sense, even though clearly this was all before Matan Torah, before the Torah was given. Right, again, whether this is meant to be understood literally or it's just a way of saying this is how we want to envision our forefathers. Okay, that the halachic system is so important. It's also the way of the rabbis who are always concerned with people saying, well, why should I do this if Avram didn't do it? So the rabbi said, what do you mean? Avram did it. And here's my proof. Okay, even if they didn't really believe it, they were trying to make a point. Mati ben Shmuel Omer, v'hu Omer. So now they want to know, Mana Marhen, who's the one who answered? Ile mahachtakaya igra, is it the one who went out onto the roof to see the sun? Hu chalin v'hu mefasher, like he says, is the sun out? And then he answers, yes. It wouldn't make sense that he dreamed the dream and he interpreted his own dream. It doesn't make sense he would ask the question and he would then answer. Elahachtakaya ara minayada, but if the one who's on the ground who then answers yes, but how would he know? He's not there. Ibait ema hachtakaya ara, ibait ema hachtakaya igra. You could say that either the one who said yes is the one who was on the ground, or he was the one who was on the roof. Let's see how. Maybe the one who was on the roof. How so? Amar iyu he'ir pnei kol mizrach. V'amar hachtakaya ara ad shebechevron. V'amar le. Okay, so let's just start slowly. Maybe it's the one who was on the roof. So he says he'ir pnei kol mizrach, and then the other one says, the one who's on the ground says ad shebechevron. And then Amar le'iyu hein. In other words, it starts with the person on the roof and ends with the person on the roof, but somewhere in between, there's this question he's answering yes to that's someone else's question. So he says, the sun is out. And the other person says, Tol Chevron. And then he says, yes. So there we have the conversation. Or, Ibait ema hachtakaya ara. Maybe it's the one on the ground. Amar iyu he'ir pnei kol mizrach. So the guy on the ground starts and he says, is it light in the east? Amar le ad shebechevron. He says, well, I don't know how far you want to know, but ad shebechevron. In other words, you want to know ad shebechevron? Ad shebechevron, yes. Amar le hein. He said, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So the yes is not yes, it's that light. It's that yes, you understood my question properly. Okay, so now why did they need all this? Remember, because of that one day that there was a mistake. Umi michlaf. Could they really make a mistake? V'hatanya. It says in the Braita. Rabbi Yomer, ino domet timor shel levana le timor shel chama. Timor shel levana metamer v'oleh kemakel. Timor shel chama maftzia lekan ulekan. The rays of the moon are not like the rays of the sun. The rays of the moon go straight up like a staff. The rays of the sun kind of spread out everywhere, disperse. So you would know the difference between the rays of the sun and the rays of the moon. They say, no, it was a cloudy day. And what happens on a cloudy day? Because the clouds block it, even if normally it goes down in a straight line. However, when there's clouds, what happens? Imagine, right? The clouds are blocking the light, and then the light it scatters all around above the clouds. And whenever there's a break, it kind of comes down in all the different places where there's a break between the clouds, which means that the light is now going to be dispersed because of the clouds that are in the way. Amar Papa Shmamina. So Rav Papa says we can learn from here. Yoma de'eva kule shimsha. On a cloudy day, it's full of sun all over. This is why they say, my mother always taught me this, on a cloudy day, you still have to wear sunscreen. And I'd always say you don't need to, because the point is on a cloudy day, the sun gets everywhere because the sun bursts out through these spots. And it's kind of like there's more sun coming through the one opening that there is, and it comes forth with a lot of strength. What's the relevance here? You know that on a day like that, it's a good day to put out the hides to tan because the sun is very strong to dry. And Inami lechidarish rava, also for the same another reason. Ishalo talush on Pesach, when you're making the dough for the matzah, lo talush lo b'chama v'lo b'chamechama, not in the sun and not in a tolada of the sun, something that was heated by the sun. So also because it might cause it to rise quicker. So you would know if it's a cloudy day, it's not a good day to do this, right? You'd have to be much more careful. Amar Rav Nachman, zuama de shimsha kasha mishimsha. Okay, the bad stuff of the sun is worse than the sun itself. This is meaning what comes out between the clouds. V'simanach dana dechala. Okay, and the way adana dechala, and the way you remember this is a jar of vinegar. Because vinegar is very strong. If you have a jar, it keeps it all inside. But if you open a little opening, you're gonna have a lot of strength of smell coming out. Next thing, shavrure de shimsha, breaks in the sun. Okay, I'm trying to remember what the difference between the breaks in the sun and the one second. The zuhama de shimsha is the zuhama is the heat of the sun. Okay, it's very strong, and that's like this potent strength, the coming out of the vinegar. And shavrire de shimsha are the rays of the sun that are poking through. Are kasha mishimsha and simanech dilfa. It's like a drip falling on a person. If you go into water, it's not the same as water dripping on you. You're much wetter when you come out of the shower than when you come out of a bathtub, because the shower is like dripping on you and it makes you wetter. I don't know, is it definitely true? Anyway, it's something to think about. That's what they say. If it's dripping on a person, a drip is much stronger than just water coming down. With that, we will end our interesting thoughts for the day, and we'll pick up from here tomorrow.